Hello everyone, Tom with Capo Fetish. I have a question for all of you today. The question is, which artists would you choose that have a sizable discography that debut as your fave? Artists that have tons of albums throughout the years, decades perhaps, but the debut is still your favorite. And you may like other albums, but still the debut is your favorite. So that is the topic of today. This is an artist that cranked out albums for decades, moved between genres with just great fluidity. But I still love his debut the best. I'm talking about Jeff Beck, his debut, Truth, from 1968, featuring a young Rod Stewart on vocals. I think this may be the debut of Rod Stewart on an actual album, a full-length album. We also have a young Rod Wood on bass, Mickey Waller on drums, and of course, Jeff Beck. So this is a real landmark album. This is the start of, the beginnings of hard rock, perhaps even metal. Came out the same year as Wheels of Fire. Cream was already ahead of the game a little bit, but this came out before Led Zeppelin. So he does a version of You Shook Me, which Led Zeppelin did on their first album. There's also a remake of Shapes of Things that the Yardbirds did. This kicks off the album in fine form. Some great rockers like Let Me Love You, some kind of more moody pieces like Morning Dew. He even does a version of Old Man River, the inside one. He even does an acoustic version of Green Sleeves that starts off side one. One of my favorite tunes on the album, though, is without question Beck's Bolero. It was recorded back in 1966. It has Keith Moon on drums, I believe. John Paul Jones on bass, Jimmy Page on rhythm guitar. In the middle of the section, you can hear Keith Moon scream during that break. It's just really atmospheric, just a great psychedelic number. For contractual obligations or what have you, it never was released until this album 2 years later. An incredible track, great psychedelic track. They have a great long version of this track called Blues Deluxe with this kind of fake audience participation, fake clapping and cheering going on. And then the album ends with one of the best tracks on the album called I Ain't Superstitious. So Jeff Beck would release a lot of other great albums I like. I like Beck-Ola. I like Rough and Ready. I like some of the fusion stuff he did later in the mid-70s, like, Wired and Blow by Blow. But I still love this album the best of Jeff Beck. This is his debut, Truth, from 1968. Another one, too, a group that never really changed their sound. They just cranked out albums throughout the late 70s, throughout the 80s, a little bit in the 90s. But I still think their first album pretty much is the one, and that is the Ramones, their debut album here. Every track is fantastic. This pretty much sets the template for their entire career. They didn't really change it that much in sound, kind of like AC/DC. Not a whole lot of difference in sound. It really comes down more to the power and the hooks and the energy. So you got starting side one off with Blitzkrieg Bop. Everything on here is great. Beat on the Brat, Judy is a punk rocker, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, that's really cool. Has that kind of early 60s kind of melody and vibe. You got Chainsaw, the whole album, just one after another. Let's Dance, I Don't Want to Walk Around With You, Tomorrow Your Love, Tomorrow the World. Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World. A classic landmark album in punk music. And I think the Ramones now are more popular than they ever were when they were actually around. All four members of this particular lineup are now gone, and I think they would probably play a place like the Forum now if they were around. They're so popular. T-shirts everywhere. Everywhere I go, there's somebody wearing a Ramones shirt. So my favorite of their discography, the first Ramones album released in 1976, I believe. Another great artist who's released so many different albums throughout the 70s, 80s, a lot of acclaimed albums like Shoot Out the Lights. His second album, I think, is fantastic. I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. He recorded with his wife, Linda Thompson. I'm talking about Richard Thompson. I still love his debut the best. Henry the Human Fly. This is his first solo album after leaving Fairport Convention. This came out in 1972. Just chock full of great folk rock numbers, really infectious, catchy songs. Starts off with Rollover Von Williams with this really unique guitar sound. I can't even really put it into words what it sounds like. but just really amazing playing on that track from Richard Thompson. There's really great folk rock type songs on here, like Nobody's Wedding. One of my favorites on here is called Painted Ladies. Fantastic. Cold Feet is another great one. Another one that ends the album called Twisted. Just chock full of just great folk rock tunes, mainly played with acoustic guitar. There's not a whole lot of embellishments on this album. Maybe an accordion here and there, or maybe a little bit of electric guitar, but overall just a great singer-songwriter album. It never went anywhere on the charts. Was claimed to be one of the worst-selling albums in Warner Brothers history. If you've never heard this album, check it out. It's such a great debut. Still my favorite Richard Thompson album out of his whole discography, and it is his debut from 1972, Henry the Human Fly. And of course, this is a band that started off with so much promise, and unfortunately they lost 2 of their band members after 2 years into their career. They went on and carried on with other band members, but they were just never the same after that original lineup. I'm talking about the Pretenders. Their first album, for me, they never recorded anything anywhere near this good. This is one of those just monumental albums released in 1980. It kicked off the 80s in high fashion. This is one of those perfectly sequenced albums. The first half is more of the rocking sound of the Pretenders. The second half is more the mellow Pretenders, more poppy sounding Pretenders. I mean, everything on here. Side 1, Precious, The Phone Call, Up the Neck, Tattooed Love Boys, Space Invader, The Wait, Stop Your Sobbing, Kinks cover. Just an absolute perfect album. You got the amazing James Honeyman Scott on guitar. Just an absolute brilliant guitarist we lost too soon. The late Pete Farndon, who we lost a few years after, or about a year after James Honeyman Scott. Just a kick-ass band. Martin Chambers on drums, and of course, Chrissie Hynde on vocals. Completely, incredibly unique when it came out. The second half is more the poppy Pretenders, Kid, Private Life, Brass in Pocket, Lovers of Today, Mystery Achievement. This is the epitome of a 5-star record, and for me, it will always be my favorite Pretenders album. I loved the second album, Pretenders 2. I liked Learning to Crawl, but I didn't really like much after that. Maybe a single here and a single there, but this is another example. First Pretenders album from 1980. Another group, I only liked their first singer. I didn't like their second singer. I think everything they did with their first singer was great. I don't really think they put out a bad album. Great hard rock, campy music. I'm talking about Van Halen, their first album. It's a perfect album from start to finish. A lot of people despise David Lee Roth. I think he was fantastic. I think he brought all the showmanship and all the great humor and great quips throughout throughout his duration with the band. And some of the lyrics are just hysterical. Of course, Eddie Van Halen. This is kind of like a whole new era for hard rock. Incredible band. Every track is amazing. They do the Kinks cover, You Really Got Me, Atomic Punk, Need Your Love Tonight. I don't need to go over every tune. You know how good this album is. And I love every album they did with David Lee Roth. I like Van Halen 2. I like Women and Children First. That would probably be my second choice after this album. Of course, there's Fair Warning, Diver Down in 1984. I think all those albums are fantastic, but cannot deny the importance and the brilliance of this debut album here. So another great one, Van Halen 1. Another great one, guy who played the blues for years, released tons of different albums. I am talking about Johnny Winter. I still love his first album the best, the Progressive Blues Experiment from 1968. This is an amazing record with a great track list. Meantown Blues is one of his standards. You got Rollin' and Tumblin' on here, tribute to Muddy. Everything flows really well on this album. And the production, it may be a little raw, but that's what I like about it. It doesn't really, there's nothing overproduced about it. It almost sounds like it was recorded like a rehearsal hall or something. There's this weird kind of echo in there, which I kind of like. And his playing is absolutely phenomenal. I don't think he gets enough credit these days. I think he's just a fantastic blues player, Johnny Winter. And I still think this debut here, even before he was signed to Columbia, this was, I think, released on Liberty, I think, originally, and then re-released years later on this particular label here. I think it's on Capitol, yeah. So I think it's better than his debut on Columbia. I love this album. The Johnny Winter's Progressive Blues Experiment from 1968. Excellent. Another group who I was never a really big fan of, but I loved their first album. I liked their second album, and I liked their third album. I didn't really like I didn't like their fourth and fifth. I'm talking about Dire Straits. I can't stand Brothers in Arms. That album just ruined it for me. Like I said, I was never a huge fan, but I loved this first Dire Straits album. Sultans of Swing aside, I mean, it's been played to death. There's some really great tracks on here. The first song on side one, Down to the Waterline, is awesome. Water of Love is a great little ballad. Southbound Again, In the Gallery, Wild West End Lions. This is a great, great debut album here, and it's still, without question, for me, my favorite Dire Straits album. Released in 1978. And of course, I've brought this one up quite a few times. This is a group that had so much promise, had so many great players, and they just threw it all away for schmaltz. I'm talking about Chicago. Their first album, Chicago Transit Authority. What an amazing album. It's like bringing jazz into rock with this kind of Hendrix-style guitar playing from Terry Kath. You got three great singers in here. Terry Kath, more of this blues-oriented singer. Robert Lamb with this smooth kind of like lounge singer kind of voice. And you've got the soprano voice of Peter Cetera, who would eventually take over the band and turn them into schmaltz down the line. But there is just nothing not to like on this album. It's just full of amazing horn arrangements. Three of the horn players that are on this album are still playing in the band today. You've got Introduction, just an amazing Terry Kath song opening up the album. Does anybody really know what time it is? One of their most infectious singles, followed by Beginnings on side one. You got Questions 67 and 68, an incredible version of I'm the Man by Spencer Davis Group, and on and on. Incredible album, double album. And even though I like the second album, and I like certain tracks off each album from about 1975, this album by far is my favorite Chicago album. And it's still one I play quite a bit. And it's really uplifting, and it's really timeless, and it's just absolutely awesome. So Chicago Transit Authority, their debut, I like that way better than Chicago 10, 12, 13, 14, you name it. It's great stuff. Another great artist I've really gotten into this artist the past 6-7 years. I really think the guy really did not put out a bad album. If you look at his discography, it's really, really solid. I love, well, we'll get into that in a minute. I'm talking about Leonard Cohen. I love I'm the Man, released in 88. I love Songs from a Room, Songs of Love and Hate, and many other of his albums. I love that last album, You Like It Darker. This album, though, is such an infectious, perfect album from start to finish, from the opening track, Suzanne, to the last track, One of Us Cannot Be Wrong. Just an amazing album. It sounds like nothing from 1967. And it's just a masterclass of songwriting and lyrics. And there's just so many great songs on here, like, what is it? Well, let's pull out the album here. I cannot remember all these tracks off the top of my head. We've got Suzanne. We've got, hold on, let's get the glasses on. We've got Suzanne, Master Song, Winter Lady, The Stranger Song. Sisters of Mercy is such an amazing track. Side 2 is equally as good. You've got So Long, Marianne, Hey, That's No Way to Say Goodbye, Stories of the Street Teachers, and then, of course, ending with One of Us Cannot Be Wrong. Just one of my top 3 all-time favorite Leonard Cohen tracks. So, the songs of Leonard Cohen from 1967. This was released late in that year. My favorite Leonard Cohen album is the debut album. And then last but not least here, I've actually featured this album way too many times, so I'm going to do it one more time. This is a band I really love. You can't really, how do you even categorize this band? They're like jazz, they're rock. There's just a lot of different elements going on in this band. They have a lot of great albums, but my favorite to this day is still the first one, Traffic, Mr. Fantasy. I think this is a really magical album. I think it's way better than the UK version because they add Paper Sun on here and Hole in My Shoe, and a few other tracks that aren't on the UK version. You've got Dealer with that beginning, that really cool guitar, that acoustic guitar, and that kind of like Santana kind of beat. This really, really heavy sounding ballad called No Face, No Name, No Number, sung with heartfelt vocals by Steve Winwood. Heaven Is in Your Mind is an amazing track. Just the album is just full of just like a cross between like cool jazz, rock, and psychedelia. And I love later albums. I like the self-titled one from '68. I like John Barleycorn Must Die. That is such a great album, but this is still my favorite Traffic album. So there's 10 examples, folks. Let me know what your favorite, it's not even really about what your favorite debut albums are. It's really about which artists that you listen to that have a sizable discography, which of those artists you feel the debut is still your favorite out of that entire discography. So let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching as always. If you haven't, please press subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.